Welcome to the Art She Manages, the podcast dedicated to remarkable women in arts and cultural management. I'm Alma, your host. My guest today is Ute Weingarten, founder and managing director of ARTPRESS, a Berlin-based PR agency collaborating with leading European cultural institutions on communication, media, and strategy. In this episode, we explore how Ute's path from studying art history in Paris to founding her own PR agency has shaped her vision for cultural communication. We talk about how institutions can stand out in a saturated landscape, why a strong USP matters, and how PR and marketing are merging into one strategic force. If you're curious about these topics, keep listening. Good evening, Ute. Thank you very much for being here and accepting my invitation.
Thank you for inviting me, Alma. Hello.
Well, let's start. So, you studied art history in Paris and lived there for more than a decade. How did those years shape your outlook on culture and communication?
Yeah. Paris was a very, very important moment in my life. It was almost like a school of seeing for me. Um, you live in a city where architecture, cinema, museums, fashion are lived by people in a very casual and normal way, and you are surrounded by beauty, and also the opposite, because in the 80s Paris was not as clean as today. But it was almost like the sensation that I had to understand where all that came from. So to understand why this exhibition would take place there, or this artist would be shown, or why these architects were chosen to build l'Institut du Monde Arabe or other sites, I think that was something which motivated me to study art history. So not only being impressed by the sheer beauty of something, but to understand the roots of culture and to understand also the context of art and the production of art. And I would say it is absolutely crucial to ask, well, who did that artwork? Why was it done? For whom was it done? When was it done? And, if you analyze that, then you start having an understanding of artistic expression.
And what led you from that foundation and that experience in Paris into PR and ultimately to founding your own PR agency?
Yes, after my studies, I stayed in Paris. And in the first years after finishing studies, I have been working in international galleries, first in Paris and then in Berlin. And for me, this was this transition from theory into practice, because I loved my studies, but I realized that I was more interested in working with living artists than studying dead artists. And that is why I was really very happy to work in good galleries and being so close, with the owner on the one hand and shaping the program, the artists. And that is probably the point where it's most understandable how then I went into PR. I think when you work in a gallery, you mediate art, and I was a really good seller because I was able to talk about art and to transmit a passion for it. And if you are able to do that, then of course you can kind of win also the interest, the curiosity, and the awareness of other people for a certain artwork or for a group of artists or whatever. So from the gallery, I went quite naturally into PR because I also thought it would be interesting to focus on one aspect of communication more than doing selling, doing this, doing that. And then I applied for a PR job in a huge exhibition in Berlin. And then I was hired, and I was working for over 2 years only for this one project. And that was fantastic. That was really diving deeply into these kind of PR. And from then on, I started my own thing.
Mm-hmm. So, you are a cultural entrepreneur. Was it challenging to start your own business?
At that time, I had absolutely no business plan or, a clear strategy. I was just doing what I wanted to do. So for me, yes, it was challenging to get enough jobs to pay people. I, from scratch, was hiring first one or two and then more because I didn't want to work on my own. And I understood that, to really get a real dynamic in PR, I think you need others to join in and to bring competencies together. For me, it's a lot about teamwork too. So yeah, I was preoccupied by, of course, getting jobs, but it was at that time a really fantastic moment to start doing that.
Well, that's great. And so that's in Berlin, right? So, what makes Berlin such a distinctive cultural hub to work from?
Well, I think at that time, Berlin was really still the city to be. If you were into mainly visual arts, which was my case, because after the wall came down, and then in the 2000s, Berlin was like a laboratory. There was, all international artists wanted to come to Berlin and live there and work there and exchange about art. And so that was really a very inspiring environment because you would go out every night to openings and meet the whole art scene. It's not like today when you have many different scenes next to each other almost, but it was like, okay, this is the art scene and we know each other and and we meet, and that was something which was on the one hand very familiar and intimate almost, and on the other hand we all had the feeling we were doing like really a pilot project or whatever. So there was something very special in the atmosphere at that time.
Well, that's actually very interesting that you mentioned that at that time it felt more intimate because, when you were talking, I was about to, prepare my follow up. And how do you compare it with Berlin's today? So, would you say that it is not like that anymore?
I well, I'm older now, so I see it certainly also from a different perspective. But I talk a lot with younger people, also from my team and around me, and I think no, it's not like it was. It's grown up on the one hand, so it became much more professional. On the other hand, I think yeah, it is not as intimate as I said because there are many, many, many more galleries and many more cultural spaces and off spaces and so on. But competition is much stronger. And I think digital communication sometimes gain over the analog contact. And for me, this was always the key for success, to meet people, to understand how they are, and then to being able to maybe propose something which would make sense for them or bring an added value. And I think today that is more difficult. It is more difficult to orientate yourself and to also to decide to which kind of scene you might want to belong to.
I can totally imagine that the number of offerings, that there are so many cultural scenes and different projects, can also result in the audience being overwhelmed. But it is absolutely fascinating to hear about how Berlin used to be. So thank you so much for sharing this. And, while I was researching your profile and your agency, I noticed that you primarily work with cultural organizations and not with individual artists. So, when a cultural organization hires you, what are the most common needs you usually see?
Well, most of these institutions, they really lack in capacity. They have not enough staff on the one hand and not enough networks with journalists and media. And I think PR is all about relationships. It's all about creating trust, and you need to have time for that. You have to invest time to create that. And a lot of institutions, they just, they have to do so many different things. If you have a department of communication, that this one aspect of contact management, I would even call it, is always a little bit, lost behind. And so they really do understand that as an agency, we talk so much to all these media and people. And that could be a good idea to work with them. So big institutions might work with us over the year, and smaller ones maybe for one only project in the year, because they think this is a huge one. We want to explore the whole potential, and then it might make sense to contact us. And so we really adapt the scope of what we offer to the needs and the budget. And that is why we have very reputed institutions as clients over the years, and sometimes also smaller ones or even artists. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what do institutions, in your opinion and in your experience, often underestimate about PR?
Well, I think this is competition. Everyone who approaches us believes that he or her has a really relevant project which makes a difference, and that this project, of course, deserves a lot of attention. And of course, it does, but the media space is shrinking on the other hand. So, our job is always in the beginning very much about explaining also what is the context for PR. And so many of the institutions underestimate the time it needs all to prepare a campaign. You can't do it last minute. I think that's very often it's then not good enough. And so successful PR needs really not only a strong topic, but an early preparation and a realistic budget. Because, of course, also nowadays, I think it's turning more and more into a mixture of earned and paid media. So, on the one hand, you will contact media and propose topics, and you might convince them to write about it or to talk about it. On the other hand, media, they need budgets to survive. So, it is good if you also can provide some fundings from the other side, saying, okay, I could imagine we do a mixture and I bring some marketing budget in. And especially magazines, of course, they depend more and more on that kind of mixture of finance and budgeting. And also, this is something we try to make our clients understand, that media must live also from something.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned that every single culture organization that approaches you thinks that their project is, the most relevant and the one that truly needs media attention. But have you ever experienced a situation when you had to reject the project because you ultimately understood that it wasn't probably that relevant after all?
Yes, of course, we have to do that because sometimes we approach, we have a look into maybe the first draft of a concept or so, and then we go into a dialogue. And then when we realize we are not at all convinced, we ourselves, then we cannot communicate it, of course. And if we think it lacks USP, it's not special enough, then we might also find an elegant way to say, sorry, but we can't take over that. And also, that is why we do so much expectation management when potential clients or active clients approach us, because this is fundamental to make clear, okay, what is realistic and what is not realistic.
Yes, for sure. And would you say that in general, from your experience in the arts sector, institutions often underestimate the importance of, market research, market validation, and things like that?
Yes, definitely, definitely. I think the art world is still very much conservative in that sense. There are a lot of exceptions on the other hand, but if you see it on a more global view, you would say, well, yeah, there is not enough research before they will develop a project. And also, and that is something we might talk later about, but I think the best would be if the communicators of a project would be already implemented in the whole process of development, because then we could also advise what might make sense for an audience or for which audience, because institutions only talk about target groups and we want to reach younger target groups and so on. So, but then often the project does not at all fit in terms of, what they might want to do or whom they might want to address. And then it would be really better to first discuss the project and then continue developing it than the other way around. But we're working on that, but it's hard. It's hard to be kind of hooked before.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds logical, right? I mean, you first develop an idea and validate it, and after that, you invest time, money, effort, right? And it shouldn't be the other way around.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you already mentioned the digital space. And how has the rise of digital platforms and especially social media changed the way, culture organizations think about PR? Are they adapting fast enough?
No. Again, we have a big fracture between the like Serpentine Gallery or MoMA or Guggenheim on the one hand, all UK or US I mentioned, and on the other hand, smaller institutions, they might not have enough capacities in manpower and knowledge to be really well prepared to build up relevant social media channels. And I think that is also where we come in, because we more and more offer consultancy on social media, and we have two people who also do workshops and who consult on strategy and content creation. And some of our clients are really happy to get that and then be enabled to do it themselves afterwards. But I think in the next years, there will be a growing tendency of the digital platforms. And again, we will see who would be able to have the right path to adapt and to offer, even through these channels, an adequate content. Because it's not only like, okay, doing it, but it's also learning how to change the tonality of a text or how important images are. You have to understand that, and more do. And more also understand that it sometimes might be a question also of generation, and it's better to a director of a museum 60-year-old might not be the best person to do social media. That some understood. And then they understand that might be people between 20 and 30 or so, still needing also this kind of quality control of those who are responsible for the institution. Because I think that is still fundamental to really get an idea how that works, but also being able to make sure that this fits to your institution, to your style, to your brand. And so it's a learning from both sides. It's also an intergenerational learning, I think.
Yes, from my observation, I feel that attempts to run social media accounts in the art sector, of course with exceptions and different budgets, are often focused solely on maintaining a presence on social media rather than developing a clear strategy and defined goals. You previously touched on generational aspects. Now let's turn to cultural ones. You have worked with a wide range of cultural institutions. Have you noticed significant differences in how PR is approached across countries or cultural contexts?
Yeah, I think the institutions we have worked with mostly are based in Europe, but some are in Northern Europe, others are maybe in Southern Europe, and so on. And of course, you have cultural differences and mentalities. But again, since we are in communication, it's very interesting to learn from each other. And so, for example, the northern countries certainly have another rhythm than we do, and they might take more time to decide upon certain measures. but they would, on the other hand, be maybe more solid in what they will come up with, And so I think it's a really interesting learning. And we as Germans are sometimes very direct and very to the point. And then we understand that that might not be the right way to to talk and to deliver something in other countries. And so that is, I think, so fascinating about having these different clients that you have to adapt to. And then you have to really kind of, rebalance what you think how it should be. And that makes it really interesting.
Yes, I have lived in different countries, and so far, Germans are indeed the most straightforward people I have met. I have to say, when you say something, you really mean it. And there is no need for the kind of interpretation that communication with other cultures might require, at least in my experience. There is this book called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer, and she categorized countries based on what she calls contexts, low, medium, and high context. And the higher the context, the more you need to read between the lines. The lower the context, the less interpretation is needed. And Germany, for instance, is considered a low context country, while many Asian countries are high context. It's a very fascinating read, and I confirm this idea about Germany because when I moved here, I was surprised, how people were straightforward, as you mentioned.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I imagine. I must say, I don't have clients in Asia or in the Emirates or so. So I'm pretty much working in a European context. So there are differences, but we all have more or less same values and so on. But I know from colleagues, of course, it's really big difference to work, with people from China or from Japan or whatever, and that must be a bigger, even bigger challenge.
Yes, I can only imagine. Well, the line between PR and marketing continues to blur. How would you describe the main differences between them?
Yeah, I would repeat what I said before. I think looking ahead, it will be more and more integrated, I think, PR and marketing. And I think the problematic is rather about budgets because we have budget cuts everywhere on the one hand. And then for funded institutions, it's hard to kind of come up with decent budgeting for marketing and so on. Whereas private foundations might be on a more sunny side and being better positioned. And so that is a bit what I fear, that we will have a growing gap between those who can and those who can't. And that is why I think we must even work more in private and public partnerships, which is a more, of course, American model in a certain sense. But we see that there are also a lot of foundations in Germany and a lot of companies and also people who would be able to and who might want to support certain thinking and initiatives and so on. So I would really encourage them to kind of trying to support what is already there instead of always creating their own museum, collection, and so on. I think if we want to make public museums survive, we have to enable them also to come up with a good way of marketing and PR. You cannot only live on press. You have to do other types of measures to be heard, I think, because media are shrinking and so on. So, and we see that economically speaking, most of the main European countries are not in the best, let's say, position at the moment. So we have to be a bit creative to think about how we would solve that problem.
That's definitely some food for thoughts, I would say. Also for the future, especially for the future if the public sector wants to survive. I mean, you mentioned museums, but I think opera theaters,
and performing arts in general are in the same position. And I totally agree with you that probably instead of creating new foundations, new projects every single time, it would be probably better to join the forces in order to, tackle these budgeting hurdles. So, my next question would be about gatekeeping. Do you think PR agencies themselves can sometimes reinforce it by choosing only safe or high prestige clients? What responsibility do agencies have in opening doors for emerging artists and let's say smaller institutions and projects?
When we observe our field, then we know that there are some very big PR companies, and I would think that they could do a little more for, as you say, emerging artists or emerging institutions. On the other hand, I would never blame someone who has to really earn money and who might have a big staff who really, thinks twice or three times what is really possible to do, to support only or to offer also services without being paid, and where is this kind of limit? You will have it at every level of PR agencies. And we do that too, that we have always a mixture of clients who really have a good budget and a decent budget, and then clients who might have less. But if we're convinced about the project, we will probably take it and do it. Maybe not for nothing, but we would understand that it's necessary to support. And so probably that would be very interesting to discuss with other agencies. And there is nothing like a round table of PR in the cultural field, which is a pity, I think. Everybody struggles a bit on his own, but that would be a good way to reflect upon that.
A round table for PR agents, that would be a brilliant initiative to bring to life. And speaking of PR trends, you've been in this industry for years. What recurring patterns have you observed or noticed? Moment when you thought, I've seen this before.
I would say PR has its own recurring formats. I think it's very different to talk about PR in a more economical, commercial context or in the art world. I think there's some ideas never fading, like authenticity through an artist's portrait, for example. This is something which will never die. Or the behind the scenes story, which is also creating the impression that you deliver exclusive content. Or the press said, so to use PR to make PR, to use quotes from coverage you might have had to create more buzz. And I think these are formats coming back again and again, and especially now in a time where everybody is creating his own content in a digital world, I would say. You have to try to be even more authentic and to be even more solid in what you offer to make a difference, right? Otherwise, it gets a little bit blurred. What is the difference between this and that? And that is why I think it is not so much important to look after the last trend, but to be really clear about your strategy and about maybe some really important mission points you want to convey and to stick to that, then running after a trend or so. Because that is what we realize when we talk to journalists, that they would really search for the authentic story and not for the last glamorous thing. Yeah, I would describe it like that.
You mentioned the behind the scenes format. And when reading about art marketing and strategies for creating compelling content, this format is one of the most frequently cited. But from your experience, would you say it has really proven to be as strategically important as everyone claims?
I think so. I think so that people are always, in a way, flattened when they think they belong to a group who is able to have access to this behind the scenes. It is the same for collectors or press or opinion leaders. I think, yes, it is still something which is really relevant. And then, of course, it depends how good it is done, for sure, quality. But yeah, it functions.
An interesting confirmation because I recently had this module about brand strategies and I loved it. And every single article and book we read was about the importance of, strategic content making and storytelling and giving this access to behind the scenes. And I just wanted to ask you about your opinion, because you're an expert in that.
We talked earlier about the challenges you faced when starting your own business, but I would love to go a bit deeper into this topic. As a leader, what are some of the biggest challenges you face now, managing your team and keeping all the internal processes running smoothly?
Well, I think challenging is always to have this balance between having really good people working for you. On the one hand, you have to have really, I think, a very good team and with kind of complementary competencies. And then on the other hand, you have to have the clients who are able to finance that. So we always come to this point of saying, well, where are the budgets? This is maybe even banal, but it is crucial. And then on the other hand, I think it's also what was always challenging, it also in that logic, of course, was to decide how big I want to grow with my PR agency. I think there was a time I could have go further and have 10, 15, 20 people. But then I decided to not do that because for me, it's better to have a smaller team and to being able to be involved in what we are doing. If you have a certain amount of people working for you, I'm not a fan of totally flat hierarchies. I think it's important to have a quality management, and quality management in a way functions if people who have more experience have a look at something others do who have less experience. And this is for both sides very valuable. But so I don't want to have an agency where you have different layers of hierarchy and which creates also a lot of administration in the end. But where you have this, you have some who are clearly the leading team, and then you have others who are really the base and who are supporting that and who will also be able to develop within that frame. That's very important. But I think this is a real challenge, an ongoing challenge to balance this size of your company and the size of responsibility, of quality, and of maybe also ability of being still a little bit flexible about what you might want to work for or with and what not, because you can't just you have to decide if this project is valuable or not. And if I only have to say yes because of commercial reasons, that would not fulfill me.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely a challenge between balancing commercial and creative sides.
Yeah.
And do you think that women-led institutions or female artists face different challenges in gaining visibility compared to their male counterparts?
I think it was like that for a very, very, very long time, decades. And then I think we all realized that there is a fundamental change in spirit and in a certain perspective We really see since 5 years, even more than 10 years ago, that there is a clear focus on women artists in the media. We see that there are a growing number of women in leading positions in cultural institutions. And we see that there is a growing number of female artists entering the list of the most important artists. This list is still run by men, but you feel there is a slight change. And so for the moment, we are in a process where we are able to change structures, and these structures will then change reality. And I think that is the reason why we're in a very, very interesting period now, where we really experience this change and where we can also participate in it. And I find that very interesting.
Yes, for sure. And at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned that you had always been good at selling, which made the transition into PR feel like a very natural step for you. There is a saying that successful salespeople often have a rather aggressive approach to business, a trait that's generally speaking associated more with men. And I was wondering, have you ever been underestimated by your male counterparts when it comes to negotiating, selling, or, like conducting business?
If I was underestimated?
Yes.
No, I don't think so. I think there are much more women in PR and communication in the art field for sure than men. And that is why it's almost a cliche that we would say, oh, women are better in communication. And but it's not a cliche. I think it's true. And so, no, I don't think I was underestimated in my job. No, I didn't met that. And that maybe I was lucky, maybe I had good people I was working for, because when I was working, for the exhibition, big exhibition, or before in the galleries, I think there was a lot of trust and a lot of support for me.
That's great. Not every single story, should be against all odds. So no, that's really great to hear.
No.
And what lessons from your own journey would you want to share with younger women entering this field now?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to see your job as a mission and not just as a job. I have often problems when I meet young people to talk about work-life balance, to be honest. I think in the beginning, you should really invest the maximum and then think about balance afterwards. Yeah. But so that might sound a bit strange, but that is my advice. Always push for excellence and don't settle for, oh, this is good enough. I would not recommend that. Trust your gut when you choose clients or projects, because PR is built on trust. You can only do good PR if you really think the people you're working for trust you and don't underestimate you, as you said before. Be bold, creative, and don't be afraid to say no if something does not seem the way it should work. And I think this is also fundamental. You should think about building your own brand. And that also, you can't do that by just being, nice and delivering the right thing people want, but you have to be really sharp and insightful, and you have to make a difference and to find your own note of dealing with people. And what is fundamental, stay fair, because it always pays back. So even if you have other people competing with you, I would really recommend to always be fair enough and not to try to, for example, go what sometimes happens, that to get a job, you lower your prices into a way which is not manageable, but just to get the job and not want that someone else gets the job and so on. So I think this is very important, to be respected, but also to respect the others.
Wonderful. And
my final question for you would be, for someone entering PR today, which set of skills they should invest in order to stay relevant, beyond 2025?
Well, I think a lot of what I said before would also be an answer to this question, actually. So there are some general qualities you need also now and in 5 years. But of course, you have to be even more aware of digital developments, and you have to probably learn faster what is possible in digital communication to adapt and to decide for you what you want to do and offer and what you might not want to do. And maybe think more in cooperation, collaboration than in thinking you have to cover everything which is needed for good PR. Maybe you focus really on something you might get an expert in, and then get the others who will be maybe much faster in the last trends in digital communication than you might ever be. So I think the future is not so much in only invest in yourself, but maybe even more invest in cooperation.
And we haven't covered a topic of AI whatsoever. Do you think it's going to change the way people think about PR and digital communication and press and journalism even more in the future?
Yes, for sure. We talk a lot about that also with the journalists we're working with. And they tell us that they think that in a few years, most of their jobs will be done by artificial intelligence. And it's extremely impressive when we use just ChatGPT and ask a few questions what might come out as a first input on a specific aspect of even PR. So I think there will be a tremendous change in communication, and we will not probably be able to differentiate at a certain point what is created by artificial intelligence and by a person. I think this is maybe what I feel most also in a certain sense, that of course we have to really accept to ask ourselves what in what we are doing is replaceable and what not. And so I think that makes it even more important to think about what is the quality of this human relationship interaction, which artificial intelligence might not be able to deliver. Because to do a research on something, artificial intelligence might do it much quicker than anybody else. But to being able to analyze, prioritize, and taking into account a lot of factors like personal reasons why even it would be good to do this, we do it the other way around because we know this person or we know how this institution is, working or thinking. I think this will be more relevant, but a lot of people might not continue having a job here.
Well, that's very sad.
Don't you
That's
think
very
so?
sad.
What do you think?
I think maybe I'm way too positive, but the way I see it, I see that there are so many things that it's still very bad at. You really have to guide it. You really have to improve it every single time, and it still hallucinates a lot, and there are lots of things that are still kind of beyond its capacity. Of course, as we speak in, they are developing new things in new models, and of course it's all very, very, very fast paced. But I think that this kind of human eyes, to just keep everything just, let's say, in a logical way, is still very, very important. And I think now is the time to be even more critical, even more strategic, and to be even more grounded and understand what your, as you said, a unique selling point is. And I liked it a lot when you said that you really have to understand what is replaceable and what is not replaceable. But I still hope that writers and journalists are still going to stay relevant because, writing skills are just so important. Like good writing, it's just extremely important. And we need good stories. And AI is not able to do that yet. So
yeah, that's true. So let's see what will happen in the next 3 years. That might be very interesting to
very
follow,
interesting.
for sure.
Yes, thank you, Ute, for this wonderful conversation and for sharing your knowledge with me and our listeners.
That was a pleasure talking to you. You're on the same, I would say, in the same mood, and you have also your experience with all that. So it is interesting also to hear your perspective, and lovely to talking to you.
Thank you very much. Wish you all the best with your life and future.
Thank you.
You have listened to The Art She Manages. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the show and leave a positive review on whichever platform you're listening. It really helps more people discover these stories. Feel free to share the episode with someone you think would be inspired by it. Until next time!